Resident Evil Extinction, a novelization by Keith R.A. De Candido. Chapter 21. Alice woke up in a motel bed and wondered if she was still dreaming. But no, she couldn't have been still dreaming, because she didn't dream in the first place. For the first time in a long time, she slept like the proverbial rock. For once, she had something to thank Sam Isaacs for. Her first good night's sleep in years came because she used the abilities he gave her. She tried to avoid them where possible, the passive powers, the strength and fast healing, for example, she couldn't do much about. The active ones, she tried not to use. But when she arrived at the convoy to see an arc of fire about to fry Carlos Oliveira, she acted on instinct. Too many good people were dead. Alice couldn't bear to see another worthy soul lost. She felt something on her arm and saw that someone had put a bracelet made of electrical wire on her wrist. Looking around, she found herself in the dilapidated remains of what used to be a lousy motel room. A young girl sat on one of the guest chairs, reading a battered, torn magazine. She had dozens of similar bracelets on her own arms. "This belong to you?" Alice asked, kicking the blanket off. The kid dropped the magazine onto the floor and nodded. "Gave it to you last night, for luck. Looks like you needed it." Trying and failing to recall the last time she slept in a real bed, Alice smiled and said, "Looks like it worked. What's your name?" "Kmart. It's where they found me. Claire and the others." "You have a name before that?" Shrugging, Kmart said, "Never liked it, and everyone I knew was dead. Seemed the time for a change." Kmart couldn't have been more than 15 years old, but she sounded like someone 3 times her age. Alice shuddered. This was what being a kid was now. She heard a sound like a leaky pipe, and turned to see several small children staring at her through the window. The noise had been one of them, shushing the others. As soon as they realized that Alice was looking at them, they ran off. Chuckling, Alice shook her head. "What's up with them?" "They didn't think you were real," Kmart said with a shrug. "They tell stories about you at night, like you're Dracula, the boogeyman, something like that." "Really?" Kmart nodded. "Carlos used to talk about you a lot. So did Jill." "Jill's here?" Alice blinked. She'd heard rumors about Jill, but nothing solid. Shaking her head, Kmart said, "No. We hooked up with her back in Atlanta, and she'd brought some folks for the convoy. Mikey was with her. So were Dylan and Blair, 2 of the guys who died this morning. But she didn't stick around. Said she didn't join groups anymore." "Sounds familiar," Alice muttered. Somehow it didn't surprise her that Jill had followed the same path as Alice. She'd been betrayed by her own back in Raccoon, when her fellow cops wouldn't stand up for her after she encountered Umbrella's undead experiments in the Arklay Mountains. And that sense of betrayal by her comrades never left. When she'd been on the run with Alice, Carlos, LJ, and Angie, Jill had always been the least trustful. And when the opportunity to leave the group came, never mind that she had little choice, she jumped at it, eagerly. Getting up from the chair, Kmart said, "Listen, we're doing a kind of memorial thing for Otto and the rest of the people who died. So I'm going to go do that, okay? Mind if I join you?" Kmart just shrugged. The classic gesture of the teenager. Some things, it appears, did not change. Alice followed Kmart through the halls of the Desert Trail Motel and found a gathering of about 20 people. They stood in a circle surrounding 10 wooden markers, each with a name scratched sloppily into it. Fred Andresi, Elizabeth Betty Greer, Monique Lang, Blair Manfredi, Dylan Matthews, Kenneth Minaya, Jared Peters, E. Richard Price, Otto Walensky, Jason Williams. A blonde-haired woman stood at the center of the circle and looked around at the survivors. "Anyone want to say something?" This, Alice assumed, was Claire Redfield. Nobody spoke. 10 people Alice hadn't gotten here fast enough to save. Alice wanted to say something, but she didn't know any of these people. LJ and Carlos were the only ones she did know. The rest had all joined up long after Detroit. Alice assumed that Molina and Briscoe had fallen somewhere along the way. The survivors, who'd lived with those 10 people in this convoy, couldn't bring themselves to eulogize them. Likely there'd been so many dead that they'd run out of words. LJ walked over to the one labeled Elizabeth Betty Greer and hung something that Alice couldn't make out on top of it. Tears were streaking his cheeks. LJ had never struck Alice as the sentimental type. She recalled him saying that he once got his own mother involved in a pyramid scheme. But there he was, grieving as hard as a person could grieve. Carlos brought the leader over to Alice. "This is Claire Redfield," Carlos said, confirming what Alice had assumed. "She put together this convoy." Alice shot Carlos a look. She had assumed Carlos to have done it. Maybe after Detroit he lost interest in leading people in much the same way Jill had lost interest in following. "Thank you for your help," Claire said. "Wish I could have got here sooner." Claire nodded. "Excuse me, I have things to attend to." Alice watched the woman walk away. She hid it better than the rest of them, but her spirit was just as broken. Idly, Alice wondered whether they had the sense to snap the necks of the 10 corpses. Otherwise, they'd all be climbing out of their graves to wreak havoc. But Alice wasn't sure how to broach the subject, and besides, she knew for a fact that Carlos knew to do that. Mentioning it would just pour salt on the giant wound that the convoy had become. "Don't take it personal," Carlos said, indicating Claire's retreating form with his head. "In the last 6 months, she's lost half the convoy." Alice raised her eyebrow at Carlos's phrasing. He definitely had had his fill of leadership if he was talking about Claire losing people, rather than the convoy or Carlos himself being the ones doing the losing. Carlos continued, "Pretty soon, there will be more of us dead than alive." Then Alice looked up at the sky. Something was bothering her. "What is it?" She checked her watch. There was still another hour before the satellite would be overhead. Letting out a breath, she said to Carlos, "Nothing." "Alice, what happened to you?" Overwhelmed by the sheer tonnage of the weight of the answer to that question, Alice said nothing. "Why did you leave?" Carlos asked, "after Detroit?" That was one she could answer. "I didn't have a choice. They were using me. I was endangering all of you." "What do you mean?" She thought about Jason and Angie and King, and wondered how Carlos could ask that. But he probably didn't realize just how much responsibility Alice carried for that. After all, technically Jason was overwhelmed by the undead. King was killed alongside Carlos trying to rescue her. And she never told him the truth about Angie. "They were tracking me," she said after a moment. "I couldn't be around you, any of you. I'd have gotten you all killed." "That's why you disappeared?" Alice realized that meant that Carlos had been actively looking for her after Detroit. And she wondered if his failure to find her contributed to his inability to continue leading. "I hacked into their company's computers and downloaded the satellite trajectories. I stayed off the grid, ceased to exist." "And after the world ended, why stay out there alone?" In her mind's eye, she saw the bullet fly out of the muzzle in a puff of smoke and smash into Angie's skull. She looked at Carlos, who had experienced so much death and destruction and was now partly responsible for more than a dozen children, and found she couldn't tell him the truth. So she just shrugged and said, "Habit." It was a weak answer, and he knew it. "Could you be more evasive?" Carlos asked. Now Alice smiled. "Oh, yes." Carlos, however, refused to take the bait. Instead, he just stared at her. He knew there was more to it than she was saying, but she would not tell him about Angie. She hadn't told anyone the truth about Angie. And then there was what had just happened that morning. Isaacs had turned her into as much of a monster as Matt had become. Never mind that she at least looked the same on the outside. How could she let herself be around people, worse, be around people she cared about, when she didn't even know what she was? The one person who could answer that question was also the one person she could never allow herself to get near. I'm better out there alone, okay? You're better alone. Carlos shook his head. Obviously, it wasn't okay. It's just safer if I'm not around people. Now Carlos did smile. So why'd you come back? Trying to match Kmart's shrug, she said, I lost my ride. That's all? Carlos prompted. That's all, Alice said, refusing to rise to the bait. And I was out of smokes. Carlos actually laughed at that. Then you definitely came to the wrong place. She burst out laughing, too, and they both just let loose with several seconds' worth of giggling, even falling into an embrace. Alice hugged him tightly for a second, not realizing until now just how long it had been since she'd had affectionate human contact. Hell, the only contact of any kind she'd had lately had been the pawing she'd gotten in Salt Lake City by those nut bars in the KLKB station. After a few seconds, she broke the embrace. Carlos, she said with as much finality as she could muster. I can't stay. She didn't add, no matter how much I want to. Then that nagging feeling came back. Had her watch been broken during her trek from her camp, or had her psychic whammy screwed it up? What time is it? She asked Carlos. Carlos blinked. Time? I don't even know what year it is. Looking around, he saw a man in a cowboy hat walking near an Enco fuel truck. Chase! Time? Glancing at his wrist, the man in the cowboy hat called back, Well, Carlos, it's 12:14. You got someplace you gotta be? Looking at her own wrist, Alice saw that it also read 12:14. She looked up at the sky one more time, then let out a long breath. The satellite wouldn't be coming around for a while yet. Shaking her head, she muttered, Getting paranoid. I'm going to go for a walk, okay? Carlos nodded. I need to take care of some stuff. For one thing, we might even be able to give you a ride. Alice had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and Carlos walked off. After watching his retreating form for a moment, Alice started walking through the camp. Several children pulled the same act they had in the motel, staring at her and pointing and whispering. Alice marveled at the very notion of being a legend of some kind. She'd garnered a reputation in security division at Umbrella. Ass-kicking Alice, they'd called her. But this was several orders of magnitude weirder. Claire intercepted her as she passed a Hummer. Got a minute? Alice nodded. We're all grateful for you helping us out. Knowing there was a but after that, Alice cut her off. But how long am I going to stay? Don't get me wrong, Claire said quickly. We really are grateful, but people saw what you did. They're a little scared. Now Alice was starting to understand why this woman was the leader. Where Carlos was using sentiment to argue for Alice staying, Claire was using practicality to argue for her quick departure. The latter was far more becoming of a leader. In response, she said, I don't blame them. People have a habit of dying around me. Sourly, Claire said, Not just you. She glanced at the 10 graves, then looked back at Alice. You want to explain what happened earlier? Alice sighed. Wish I could. They did something to me, something I can't explain, can't control. Alice assumed she didn't have to explain who they were. At this point, Umbrella's crimes had been laid bare to the world. Sadly, the world had bigger problems than prosecuting those crimes. Looking around at the camp, Alice went on. So I don't blame these people for being scared. Truth is, I'm scared myself. Claire stared at her for a second. Alice found she had trouble reading her expression, which was probably because of the limited human contact she'd had the last couple of years. Finally, Claire said, I hate to say this, but we face enough dangers every day. I don't know if I need another so close to home. I understand, Alice said, grateful that she'd already told Carlos she'd be going. And I won't be staying. If I can help you, I will. Then you'll never see me again. What, you'll just go back out there? Again, Alice nodded. That's a hard way to live. Alice smirked. Takes a little getting used to. Everything does these days. Now Alice had no trouble reading Claire. She was in despair. They all were, truly. Alice thought back to a red journal full of scribblings about Arcadia, Alaska, and remembered that the best cure for despair had always been a little hope. Claire, I found something the other day that you guys might be able to use. Chapter 22. Isaacs watched the image on his screen eagerly. Repositioning the satellites had done the trick. The White Queen had been able to pinpoint the 2 psionic bursts to the western region of what was once the United States, putting her in Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Idaho, Oregon, or Washington. The satellites then searched further, acquiring any face they could pull out. One was with a convoy of living humans, about 20, which was impressive for a mobile group in these dark times, in Nevada. The satellite was only able to get a partial facial identification, but the White Queen proudly declared that face to be a 62% match with the images of Alice Abernathy that they had on file. Isaacs allowed himself a rare smile and said, "Welcome home." The satellite had done the same for the others with Alice, and the White Queen flagged 2 of them as likely being Carlos Oliveira and Lloyd Jefferson Wayne, 2 of Project Alice's accomplices during the raccoon disaster and its immediate aftermath. Unfortunately, Isaacs had to contact Chairman Wesker before any sort of retrieval operation could be authorized. He could try to order the security personnel himself, but then that ass Slater would simply overrule him and bring Wesker in to enforce it. So, as much as it galled him, he put in a request to have a private conversation with Wesker. Within the hour, he was standing in the meeting room, speaking with Wesker's holographic image projected into the same chair as during the bigger meeting, and he filled the chairman in on what the White Queen had found. Wesker rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You're positive it's her?" 62%, too great a chance to pass up. In a tone that indicated disagreement with Isaac's statement, Wesker said, "If it is Project Alice, she's been evading the satellite grid for years." Detroit again. Isaacs was never to be free of reminders of that, apparently. "I've already rerouted the satellites. We can reacquire the subject, and she'll be unaware of our surveillance. I can have a strike team ready within the hour." No. Isaacs had to strain every muscle in his body to keep the disappointment from showing on his face. Wesker continued, "We'll reestablish a positive identification first, 100%. Gritting his teeth, Isaac said, "The group she's with included known associates, Oliveira and Wayne. Besides which, the original Project Alice is vital to my research, to the whole process of domestication. Her blood, her genetic structure is the key. The longer we leave her out there, the greater the chance we lose her again. I can't risk that." In a low, dangerous tone that made Isaacs realize that he'd perhaps overstepped a bit, Wesker said, "That decision is not yours to make. You'll take no action till this matter has been discussed by the committee at the next scheduled meeting." With that, Wesker's image winked out. "Damn it!" Isaacs yelled to the empty room. The next meeting wasn't for another 3 days. Project Alice could be anywhere in that time, and there was no guarantee that they'd be able to find her again. Reaching into his lab coat, Isaacs pulled out the digital recorder. The red light was on, indicating that it was still recording. He touched a button, and the red light went off. Returning to his lab, Isaacs once again docked the recorder, adding this conversation to the sound files he already had in a secure, password-protected folder on his hard drive that he simply called 15627. A series of numbers picked randomly. He ran a program that would carve out Wesker's voice, then isolate the individual words. The program created new files for each word, and the directory for 15627 saw several sound file icons being added, each with a file name corresponding to the word in question. When the computer flashed the words "Capture Complete," Isaac sat down and called up another program, one that would compose a sound file from the individual files he created. The work was tedious and slow, but after about 20 minutes he had a complete sound file. He played it to be sure. Wesker's disjointed voice played over the speakers, the words sounding uneven and with odd pauses. The committee authorize immediate action, release of vehicles and personnel under command of Dr. Isaacs. Isaacs smiled. Soon. Very soon. Chapter 23. Jill Valentine had spent most of the last few days gathering up every citizen of the city of Baltimore who wasn't in the convention center. That proved to be depressing in many ways. For one thing, the number of people she'd been able to find was only 100, and those she found were barely able to stand upright. They were malnourished, dehydrated, and many were on the brink of death. Worse, these people were also unarmed, unless you counted 2x4s that were lying around abandoned row houses, which meant that when people did die, and according to Andre, they did pretty regularly, they came back as Z's. Safety in numbers was a concept that they had abandoned. Many had gone to the convention center hearing of food and shelter, but the few who made it back alive said that they shot anyone who came close, a tactic Jill had experienced firsthand. The convention center was just for them boys. It was hard enough for people to survive in this world, but to have them denied at least a chance by their fellow living humans, Jill wasn't about to stand for that. First, she needed to organize everyone, bring them all together. That proved challenging. Some were willing to be convinced, some were too weak to argue, and just went along for lack of ability to reject the notion. One person, a woman named Maureen, refused to exit her building, saying, "Last time I talked to somebody, she died and tried to eat my butt. Get!" Jill finally persuaded Maureen to come out in exchange for food. Besides her own stores, Andre had shown her a deli that was bolted shut that nobody had been able to get into. Jill broke into the place with very little effort. While the perishables had rotted to the point where you could hardly breathe, they managed to liberate a mess of canned food and bottled water. She had made her pitch to each person, gathering them all up in an abandoned building on Fayette Street. Most everyone said yes. The ones who didn't were so far gone that there was no helping them. They'd be dead and zombified soon. Jill had been half tempted to shoot them in the head and have done with it. When she asked if there was anyone left, Andre hesitated. "There's one guy, but you don't want to be talking to him." "Why not?" "He's crazy." Someone else, a boy named Marlos, said, "You talking about Jasper?" "Hell no." That last word's Val went on for several seconds. "He one crazy bugger. Back in the day, he used to be Popo. And when this stuff went down, he took all the dope and all the guns." "He was a cop?" Jill asked. "What did I just tell you?" Marlowe said. "Yeah, he a cop. Back when they was cops and stuff. Used to trade drugs for food, but he don't be doing that no more on account of ain't no one getting high no more." That surprised Jill. Nobody gets high? Andre shrugged. Nothing to get high with. All the junkies, they died from the DTs and became Zs. Ain't nobody left who want it. So where is this Jasper guy? It took 10 minutes to pry the information out of Andre and Marlowe, seeing as they thought that Jasper would shoot her in the head if she came anywhere near. Finally, Marlowe said he was in an old ARM building. That was the African Revival Movement, a black power organization that had been founded to aid the African American community in Baltimore. It had been shut down after a scandal involving the founder. Jill had a vague recollection of reading about it. Nobody would go with her to the tall, gray stone building, but Jill figured it was better to go alone anyhow. She brought the Prius to a spot a few blocks away and went the rest of the way on foot, trying to stay low and out of sight. She quickly saw that the place was barricaded up, with gun sights on all the upper floor windows. Nobody appeared to be at those sites, but there were ways to automate that this Jasper guy may have had access to. Marlowe and Andre and several others had said that this guy thought he had the biggest dick in Balto City, and that he only talked to people who dealt with him, in his words, from a position of strength. Andre was pretty sure he did exchanges with them boys in the convention center, and that they had some kind of truce. Jill was hoping to get him to break that truce. Raising her 9, she took out one of the sniper muzzles. Then she stepped forward and raised her hands. "Officer Jasper, my name is Jill Valentine. I want to talk." "I should shoot you in the face for what you just did," came a voice from the upper floors. "That was to show you that I could. I also could have taken out the rest of your sniper rifles before you had a chance to lock and load, since I doubt you saw me coming." "You're one confident girl, ain't you?" She smiled. "I know what I'm capable of. I also know what you're capable of, and I need your help." "Buzz off, lady. I don't help nobody." "Really? I was told you were a member. Didn't you swear an oath to serve and protect?" "That's good, throwing the badge in my face. I got me a shield, lady. But it don't mean anything no more. Let me guess. You dated a cop once, so you know the lingo." "No, I'm a member too. Officer Jill Valentine, Stars." "Stars? What the hell is that? Wait," he said before Jill could answer. "That's those bastards up in Raccoon City, right?" "It was, yeah, back when there was a Raccoon City." Jill was getting tired of shouting to the rooftops. "Can I come in?" "I know that name, Valentine. You work with some jerk named Wells?" "He wasn't a jerk, but Peyton Wells was my sergeant, yeah. I met his ass in a conference in Seattle. Only person there who didn't have a stick up his butt." Jill chuckled. "Yeah, that's Peyton. He said you were the best on his team, so I guess you okay." Putting her hands on her hips, Jill shouted up, "That mean I can come in and talk with you?" "Depends on what you want to talk about." "Right now, leaving aside the people in the convention center, there are maybe 100 people in the entire city of Baltimore. That's the same city you once swore an oath to serve and protect. That number is dropping by the minute because the guys in the convention center are hoarding all the resources and killing people to get them. The city might stand a chance if everyone pitches in, and it could become a haven. The structure's all there, but the jerks in charge are keeping it for themselves." Jasper finally stuck his head out the window. He had an afro that went up about a foot over his head and a thick beard. His brown eyes looked only slightly crazy, which was a lot less crazy than Jill had been figuring. "How you know about this?" Jasper asked. "They shoot anybody comes close." "They tried. I shot 'em first." "Good girl." Then he stuck his head back in the window. Jill waited for something to happen. "Jasper?" She picked up her 9. What was he? Then the front door opened. "Well, don't just stand there," Jasper said. Jill noticed he was armed with at least 3 different guns that she could see, plus a few knives and 2 bandoliers over his chest. "Get your ass in here." Smiling, Jill holstered the 9 and approached the 3 steps that led up to the front door. Chapter 24. Claire stared at the select members of the convoy she'd gathered in the back of the 8x8. Herself, Mikey, Carlos, and Chase. Alice was also present, having just finished telling everyone else what she'd told Claire earlier about the red journal she'd found. Normally, Claire would have included LJ, but he was still too far gone in grief over Betty to think straight. Once Alice was finished, and while she was talking, the journal had been passed around from person to person. There was silence, aside from Mikey flipping pages. Chase finally broke it by speaking in a dreamy voice. "A safe haven, free of infection." Staring at a page full of pictures, Mikey said, "It's the promised land." Claire couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had been willing to let Alice tell the other senior-most members of the convoy about the journal, but only after Alice all but bullied her into it. "Alaska, are you crazy? Have you any idea what kind of journey that would be?" Shrugging, Chase said, "Long?" "Well," Mikey said, 2,746 miles. Everyone stared at him. Claire wondered for a second how he knew that, then remembered that Mikey was, at heart, a geek. In a small voice, Mikey added, "Or thereabouts." "And we don't have enough gas for the next week." Claire looked right at Alice, who, damn her, was just staring back with those big blue eyes of hers. "And at the end of it, what? You've no guarantee there's even anyone alive up there." Mikey held up the journal. "These transmissions are dated from 6 months ago. How many radio broadcasts have we responded to? How many times have we got there too late?" Nobody replied to that. The answer to the second question was a number only slightly smaller than the answer to the first one. Alice said, "According to these transmissions, there's no infection up there. They're isolated, safe." Again, Claire stared at Alice, and again, Alice stared right back. "This convoy trusts me with their lives. Do you have any idea what kind of risk this would be?" Chase said quietly, "One worth taking." "No," Claire said firmly. She was sorry she even let Alice talk about this. "These people don't need pipe dreams." Maybe that's exactly what they need. Claire turned to look at Carlos, who hadn't said anything until those 6 words. "What?" "Look at them, Claire," Carlos said emphatically, his honey voice sounding ragged with stress and pain. 6 months ago there were 50 of us, then 40, now we're down to 20. We buried 10 people this morning alone. They're starting to give up. They need some hope. This kind of hope could get them all killed." Carlos barked a nasty laugh. "The world could get them all killed, Claire. Do we really have a better chance doing what we're doing now? Driving around hoping for the best and being menaced by birds? God, did you see it this morning? 10 people died, and nobody could even say a word. Freddie was a carpenter who had 3 kids. Dylan was an army ranger who fought in 2 wars. Jared was a shoe salesman. Betty was a paramedic who was studying to be a nurse. Kenny was a bank clerk who was going to school to become a lawyer. Monique was a physical therapist and a grandmother 3 times over. Jason was a television producer. These people had lives. But by the time they died in this convoy, nobody seemed to care. We need something to care about, Claire, or we may as well all eat our guns and be done with it." Claire looked around at the others. Mikey and Chase both had the same intense desperation as Carlos. Alice, she still couldn't read Alice. Maybe Carlos was right. At the very least, she owed it to the others to give them the option. 10 minutes later, she'd gathered the entire convoy around the 8x8. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for her to tell them what to do. Days like this, she wondered why they followed her. She hadn't exactly led them to freedom and safety, but then maybe this was as good as it got now. We have a decision to make. It's too big, too important for me to make it for you. There's a chance there are survivors in Alaska. There's a chance the infection hasn't reached that far, but we don't know for sure. So we have a choice. We stay as we are, or we try for Alaska. She paused for a moment, looked around at everyone. Already she could see something different in their eyes. For Alaska? Most of the 20 hands rose. How fitting that in the middle of the desert, everyone voted for the oasis. Claire just hoped it wasn't a mirage. All right then, let's get it together. She jumped down from the 8x8 and went straight for Alice. I hope you're right. Me too, Alice said with a smirk. But in all seriousness, what's the alternative? Driving around and hoping for the best? At least now you have a goal. Claire gathered all the drivers around the news truck. Mikey, the news truck, Carlos, the 8x8, Chase, the Unco truck, Claire herself, the Hummer, and Morgan, whom Claire had asked to take over the ambulance now that it had been dug out of the sand. Food's virtually gone, Carlos said. Claire knew that from what Otto had told her last night. She forced herself not to think about the fact that Otto was no longer around to talk about it. Otto had been the glue that held the convoy together, especially given how good he was with the kids. What would happen? She cut the thought off as Carlos went on. Fuel tanker's almost empty. Speaking of Otto, she'd also had some of the others siphoning off gas from the school bus, which was useless to them as a vehicle now, and strip it of its armaments. They were also siphoning gas from the quad bike. Alice even offered some of the fuel she had left from her now trashed bike, which she'd siphoned before coming here. Mikey said, I've got half a tank of gas, that's it. And with the added weight, the news truck had taken on kid duty with the school bus gone. We're running on empty, Morgan said. When Carlos prompted him, Chase said, I don't even have empty, I got fumes, vapor. He made a show of sniffing the air. Parfum de gasoline. So if we're going to make this trip, Carlos said, unrolling a wrinkly, beaten-up, half-faded map, we need to resupply. These are our options. He laid the map out on the news truck's hood. Claire looked down to see a map of Nevada that also had bits of California, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico in it. Carlos pointed at Caliente. Nearest safest bet is here. Alice shook her head. Tried a month ago. Empty. Pointing now at Mesquite, Carlos said, then here. Again, Alice shook her head. His finger hovered over Yarrington. Carlos said, maybe, but cut himself off at a look from Alice. Claire's eye, however, caught another city, one she should have thought of in the first place. She had thought of it, but dismissed it as too dangerous. But in for a penny, in for a pound. Vegas. Everyone turned to look at Claire. Most regarded her as if she were insane. She explained herself. It's the only place we're sure to find gasoline and supplies. There's a reason for that, Carlos said. Vegas is too damn dangerous. Chase was shaking his head. It's lousy with them. Claire took a breath. If we're going to go for Alaska, we're going to need a lot of gasoline, and we've sucked every small town pump dry over the last 6 months. We have to hit a big city again. She's right, Alice said. Vegas is our best bet. Mikey looked scared but resolved. Chase and Morgan looked resigned. Carlos still looked as if he thought Claire and Alice both needed to be locked up. Finally, Carlos lowered his head. Fine, desperate times and all that other nonsense. Works for me, Chase said. Let's saddle up. They all moved to their respective vehicles. Claire walked down the convoy, making sure everyone was set. As she passed the ambulance, she noticed that Morgan looked nervous in the driver's seat. You okay? Yeah, just, Morgan sighed. I was thinking about becoming an EMT when, everything went to hell. Never thought I'd drive one of these. This wasn't how I wanted it. We got far away from wanted a long time ago, Morgan, Claire said while she put an encouraging hand on his shoulder. Through the open window. Listen. How are we on antibiotics? Not bad, actually, especially now that... Morgan winced. Now that what? Morgan let out a long breath. Now that we're down to 20. Yeah. She squeezed his shoulder, then went on to the 8x8, where Alice got in next to Carlos, and Kmart got in behind Alice, staring at her as if she was some kind of goddess. Claire sighed. She supposed that it was inevitable, especially the way the stories about Alice had gotten out of hand even before she showed up and used her magic tricks to save Carlos's life. On the one hand, Claire wished she would have shown up sooner, maybe saved a few more people who didn't make it. On the other hand, they were lucky she showed up at all. Claire got into the Hummer. Two of the other teenagers, a girl named Tracy and a boy named Brian, sat in the back seat. Kmart said you'd need the company, Tracy said. Chuckling, Claire fastened her seatbelt and started the ignition. Thanks, guys. Thank her, Brian said sourly. We wanted to be in the news truck. That's where the cool gadgets are. Tracy hit her brother in the arm. Shut up! Shaking her head, Claire picked up the PRC. Everyone good to go? In turn, Mikey, Carlos, Morgan, and Chase all answered in the affirmative. Let's move. Sitting in the passenger seat of the Enco tanker, LJ tried not to think about how much everything hurt. Chase was driving. You okay? LJ shrugged it off as best he could. Yeah, I'm fine. Pork and beans, man. Lethal. Don't know how you cowboys do it. Chase laughed. It was going to be over soon. LJ knew it. He should have just walked away. It was how he'd do. Get the hell out of there before the heat hit. That was his philosophy. And it kept him going when a lot of other guys were doing time. But things changed when he came out here. People was counting on him. And wasn't that a kick in the head? People depending on L.J. Wayne, like he was some kind of savior. It was a weird feeling, but it was kind of cool, too. Which made it all harder. L.J. knew he should have just walked out into the desert, let this T-virus take him, and then he'd be a zombie, just like Rashonda and Dwayne and those kids back in Raccoon. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't just leave. He had to hold on so he could help some more. He had to be here for these people. You sure you're okay? The last thing LJ wanted was pity. He put on a whinier version of Chase's drawl. You sure you're okay? Not going all Brokeback on me, are you? Hey, take it easy. Just worried. You're my wingman. Hell, you're this convoy's wingman. Just making sure you're all right. I'm fine, LJ said. Just Betty, right? LJ blinked. Yeah. He hadn't even thought of using his grief over Betty, who didn't deserve what she got. Not that any of them did, to cover up. Hell, he was sick. Yeah, that's probably it. Don't want to talk about it. Okay. Chase actually shut up after that. LJ stared out the window of the tanker. Alice sat in the passenger seat of the 8x8. It wasn't until they were on the road that she realized that there was a gaping hole in the floor of the army truck. The pavement went zooming by under her feet. Looking over at Carlos, she smiled. Nice ride. Within minutes, they were on U.S. Route 93, headed south. A sign read, Las Vegas, 155 miles. Kmart leaned forward so she was between the two front seats. What's Vegas like? Alice shrugged. Used to be a fun town. Now? Turning, Alice gave Kmart as serious an expression as she could provide. Let's hope we don't stay there long enough to find out. They stayed on 93 for quite some time, Eventually, the rhythm of the road put Kmart to sleep in the back. As soon as she was out, Alice turned to Carlos. "You know she likes you." Frowning, Carlos asked, "What?" "She has a crush on you." "Kmart?" Carlos shook his head. "She's 14 years old." "Old enough, especially now." "Yeah." The convoy passed some undead shambling down the side of the highway, seemingly without aim. "You ever think we're the freaks?" "What do you mean?" Alice asked, even though she was fairly sure she knew. "That we're the anomalies, the last of the dinosaurs. We screwed up the world, and so the world screwed us back. Look at 'em." He indicated the undead with his head as he drove. "This is their world now. We don't belong here." Shaking her head, Alice said, "Believe that if you want, but I'm not ready to surrender to the new world order just yet." She reached into the pocket of the door and pulled out the journal. Flipping through, she found one of the glossy articles on Arcadia, which was attached with a paperclip. Removing both article and clip, she used the latter to attach the article, with its lovely photograph of the picturesque town, to the sun visor above her. She looked at Carlos. "There's an end to this. I'm sure of it."